So the purpose of this video is to give a brief history of the history of moral philosophy and to explain how we're going to start to approach discussions and applications of morality throughout this course. So Jonathan Haidt describes morality as answering this question of, how does one live and die well? How can I go through the things that I do? How can I go through family life, friendship, my work, my rest, my relationship to society as a citizen and as a human being? And how can, when I approach my deathbed, can be confident that I have lived well? And this is a heavy question. Now, throughout most of history, when we look at the great religions of the world, when we look at the philosophers from the Greek tradition and on through most of the Middle Ages, most people focused on the habits and the virtues that people should use in order to live well. And these habits, these virtues, were generally codified in Proverbs. And it's actually pretty interesting that most cultures have a series of Proverbs. And they're often not specific rules, but they're more like observations about the nature of reality, like with, pride comes before a fall, that, it's not necessarily saying you should do something, but basically that this is something that happens often within reality, so we should be aware of that. As iron sharpens iron, so one brother sharpens another. This is another example of, this is just a way that we can become better if we are working together and kind of through confrontation and improving. Now, eventually, in the West, and our culture is generally having received that, there started to be a suspicion of this approach, partially because it relied a lot on tradition and authority. That when we look at these sayings and these ways of approaching things, these come from what we've seen in the past, from tradition, and this question became, in the Enlightenment, there was a focus on reason and simplicity. That from the reasonable perspective, can you prove that this is the case? And it's true if you can prove it. If you can't prove it, then it probably isn't true. And similarly, there's this goal to move towards simplicity, which is that basically something that is more true will be more adaptable and more usable in different circumstances. And so the question, is it universally valid? Does this work in every situation? Does this work in every case? This is one of the driving questions as well in the Enlightenment. And you can see this in the scientific method with the goal to simplicity. And if you look at the real drive to have scientific studies be peer-reviewed, that if other people can replicate their data, if it's universally valid, then that scientific study is more true. And reason is more the field of mathematics and logic. And so we see these two approaches really become codified in the way people approach morality. And there were many, many thinkers who looked at this, but I want to focus just on two. First, Immanuel Kant. And his question that he asked was, we could figure out whether an action is good if that action is universally recommendable. So this is very simple. So if I could say that everyone in similar situations should do the same thing, then it is good. And we can use this way of processing actions as the way that things should be done. So if I can't recommend universally that everyone lie, then lying isn't good. But if I could recommend like, oh, people should tell the truth, that action is universally recommendable, that the world would work better if people told the truth, then that would be seen as a good action. That would be a logically simple and universally valid good action. And so in Immanuel Kant's philosophy, I'm simplifying it. Obviously, he has a great body of work, but morality is determined by the motivation of the doer. And like, in this act, what am I doing? And am I doing something that is universally recommendable? And so it is in the action itself and in the motivation of the person doing it that an action is right or wrong. Now, Jeremy Bentham, I'm going to move to the other side, had a different approach, and his philosophy ends up being called utilitarianism. And his question is the result better? Does the result provide a benefit for humanity and the world in general? And so the best things, the most right things, are things that, when done, create a highest total benefit. Now, one important thing is it doesn't matter who the benefit goes to. It matters that there is great total benefit. And so this would account for instances of self-sacrifice, where I sacrifice myself for others. Most cultures see this as very good. And he would explain this because this person loses, but many people gain. And so this is a morally just action. And so their difference is primarily that Immanuel Kant looks at the motivation and the action, whereas Jeremy Bentham looks more at the results. Now, both of these approaches are quite reasonable, and you can see how they're looking at ways that you can codify, like, what is good, what is bad, in a very reasonable and logical way. Now, and so many moral philosophy courses begin with the trolley problem, where you are in a trolley and you're headed towards 5 people who are tied up to a train track. I don't know why this person is sleeping, but they are tied up, they can't move, and you can't stop the trolley, but you can flip a lever to switch the track to go and kill just one person. And many moral philosophy classes begin this way, because there's this question of, is the action to pull a lever and then kill someone, like, is that universally recommendable? Or, kind of the Jeremy Bentham style, the utilitarianism, like, well, obviously you should turn it because then you'll save 5 people rather than saving 1. And there are many iterations of this that come about. Now, one of the issues with this, although it can be helpful to illustrate these principles, one thing that people talk about is like, well, why can't the thing stop? Why can't you yell out to them? Why can't you do something else? And this is something that's really valid, that in life, we rarely ever truly have 2 options. We don't have an infinite amount of options, but we rarely have just 2 options. And the other problem is that if you get really good at arguing this really horrible and traumatic example, this doesn't actually necessarily make you better at making the decision if you were in the midst of it. And that's kind of the problem with a lot of these, like, well, if someone comes into your house in the middle of the night, like, what are you going to do? The honest answer for most people is, I have no idea. If you haven't trained for that, then what you think intellectually is good or right isn't necessarily what you would do. And so one of the issues is that it doesn't necessarily correlate to what people would actually do. And thirdly, that when we focus morality on just logical explanation of scenarios, one of the problems is that it keeps all of the knowledge about morality in the intellect. that it's about being able to argue persuasively. It's about being able to think clearly. And these things are good, but there is a problem, as this infographic demonstrates. And it is because we are people, and people don't actually do what they know is good all the time. So for instance, like, I might know that it's important to exercise, and I might know that it's unhealthy to spend too much time looking at my phone. And I might know that I should choose healthier foods rather than less healthy foods. But in the moment, I might not choose any of them, even though they're not very controversial. And so this is kind of the point, that the intellect generally does know what's right, but the lived experience doesn't always follow through. And so part of this is because, like, in the way we look at morality. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And so oftentimes when we talk about morality from an intellectual point of view, we act as though if I know what's right, I'll be able to do what's right. And so we often act as though our body, mind, our whole being is like a car. And a car, if it's operating properly, if I press the gas, and you can see that here, if I press the gas or the brake, if I press the gas, it goes. If I press the brake, it stops. If I turn the steering wheel, it turns. If I turn the steering wheel the other way, it turns the other way. And this is the way a car functions. So the relationship between my conscious mind, which would be the person, the driver, and my body and my subconscious would be very close. There'd be almost no problem, except for if the car is not in good repair. Like, for instance, if I want to go exercise, but I'm sick, that it's not going to work, even though I know that it's a good thing. Or perhaps if I'm addicted to exercising and I'm sick and I need to rest, that could be an example of where the car is malfunctioning. Now, the problem with this metaphor is that this doesn't actually mirror the way neuroscience has revealed the way the brain actually works. That we're much more, and this is kind of strange because this is an example from classic philosophy from thousands of years ago, that we're much more like like a rider on an elephant. And the key difference here is that the rider has a will and the elephant has a will. And the rider might be better at forward thinking about the future, thinking about all of these different things, might be better at logical problem solving and all of this, but the elephant is stronger. And so this is the reason we use this metaphor, is because when we think about the elephant as both the body and the subconscious brain, it's important to recognize this, because whenever you have any stimulus, whether it be sight or feel, all of your senses, that before your brain gets to interpret the data, your body already interprets it. And that's a good thing. We developed this to keep ourselves safe. And so this is the reason why people often will have fight or flight or freeze scenarios before the rational brain is able to process, like, am I actually in danger? And we also have subconscious brain activity, things that we're just doing automatically. And people might see this in, for instance, if you go look at your phone, and you might have like a series of things you just start doing automatically, and then you'll be like, oh wait, why was I even looking at my phone? And it's because your subconscious brain is always going, and we have to work harder to activate our conscious brain. Hence why it's conscious. And so the point here is that as we look at this example, I'm going to move myself over here, that the conscious brain might know, okay, I'm supposed to go work out right now, but if your body and your subconscious brain want to go this way, you're going this way. And so to bring this all together, that knowing what's right intellectually, that being able to argue from reason and simplicity about what's right or wrong within the classroom will not actually have a great effect to your ability to choose what's right in the moment. And so, as it says over here, morality cannot be simply about knowing what is moral. It must also be the ability to do it. And it's interesting because as I looked at a lot of your personal moralities, they are way more in common than they are different. And this is actually really good, that people generally know and want the good. And so this is why we're not going to spend as much time in this course talking about what is right and what is wrong. And we're going to spend a lot more time on the second part, which is the ability to do it. Because oftentimes our disagreements about what's right and wrong are more about a history of failed attempts to do what's right. And so we settle, and that gets brought in throughout history and culture. And so if we focus on the second one, honestly, a lot of the differences about what people believe about right and wrong become less important. And so I actually kind of hope this becomes a bit of a catchphrase in the class, but our goal is going to be to train our elephant, to train your body and your subconscious brain so that way you can do what you have thought about. So I'm going to go down a little bit further. And so there are three basic ways that people are formed. And we're formed automatically. That even if you haven't taken this course, even if you haven't learned these things, you're already formed by them. And the one that I brought up of going onto your phone is an example of a habit. I know for myself, if I just drive down a road that I'm familiar with, sometimes if I'm not thinking consciously, I'll subconsciously just end up on my way to school or on my way to my friend's house or whatever. And that's because I've done these things so many times that I start to do them automatically. And so if I'm doing things automatically, obviously it's easier for me to continue doing them. This is the reason why people say that if you want to sleep well, that going to sleep at the same time and waking up at the same time is a good habit, because then your body will be like, I go to sleep now. And then, I wake up now. And so you won't have as many problems. And that's why people sleeping in on the weekends, it really disrupts that habit, and we kind of have to get all back into the rhythm again. The other thing is community, that people tend to do what they see other people doing, that what people do matters much more than what they say. And so a huge indicator of what people care about, what people are going to do, is based on the community. Who's around you? Who do you hang out with? When you are on YouTube, on Netflix, what are you watching? Whatever you're seeing other people doing, that isn't necessarily what you're going to do, but your body and your subconscious mind is going to do that quite easily. That, and you maybe have played that game where someone says put your hand on your nose, and they put their hand on their head. And people will often do this because we have to really work hard to not imitate what people are doing and focus on what people are saying. Because what people are saying is more connected to our conscious mind, and what people are doing, we're actually pretty in tune to copy quite well. And these are actually all good things. They can be bad if we don't become aware of them and don't approach them intentionally. If we just kind of go through life and just don't consciously develop habits, but just let habits happen to us, and we aren't intentional about who our influences are, who our community is, we could just end up doing whatever. And